I'm Jay Webb. Welcome to Inside the Interview, a place where I turn the tables on decision makers at some of the world's most innovative companies and speak with them a little bit about their experience, but then more importantly, how they go about evaluating candidates during the interview process, and then more specifically, which 3 core competencies must they see in every candidate to decide to not necessarily make them an offer, but at least to say, you know what, I'd like to move this person to the next round of interviews. So today, I'm happy to have on Peter Maglathlin. Peter Maglathlin is the co-founder of Hourly Nerd. Hourly Nerd is an online marketplace that connects MBA students and their alumni to small and medium-sized businesses. Peter, welcome to Inside the Interview.
Thanks, Jay, for having me. I'm excited for this.
Absolutely. So let's just start there. Tell me a little bit about Hourly Nerd and what your roles and responsibilities are there.
Sure. So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, what we are is an online platform / marketplace that connects small, medium, and some large businesses now with high-quality freelance labor in the form of MBAs. And the thesis behind the idea is that, hey, there's a huge number of businesses out there of all shapes and sizes that have project needs that they're either not pursuing due to a lack of experience or time, or they're pursuing at a cost that's almost prohibitive. Mm-hmm. And so what we're able to do is pair them with the people, individual MBA freelancers that are able to pursue these projects in a very sophisticated way, but also at a price that allows them to pursue them. So to this point, the uptake's been great, and we've hooked up, thousands of MBAs with thousands of businesses on our platform.
Let me ask you this really quick. What was the genesis of the idea? How did it come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, one of my co-founders, Rob Biederman, had been helping his father, who actually owns his own business, with some tasks that were related to Excel and finance that were very easy for Rob to execute on in, call it 1 to 2 hours, but probably would have taken his father, 10 to 12 hours. Mm-hmm. So this is when we realized, hey, there's a need out there, and there's a big pool of labor that's not necessarily being matched with businesses that could really use their services. Mm-hmm. So from there, we started testing the idea just with local businesses in the area. Had a great reception, and since then have blown it out to businesses really all over the world.
Okay, great. That's a fantastic concept, as I said before we got started. So let me ask you, let's say if someone were to apply, whether it's to Hourly Nerd or to any companies out there, there are a lot of people that are looking for jobs, of course, and there's just a real sea of candidates. If I'm a candidate and I want to, let's say, get in touch with, get in front of someone like yourself or anybody in the decision-making process, how do I break through the clutter and get your attention and rise above some of the folks that are in there? What do I need to do, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think given the job market, and given I think we are in an especially attractive space, we do see a lot of resumes come in the door. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I'd say the first thing that is a very telling sign is persistence, right? I mean, you're not always going to get the eyes and ear of someone who's very busy the first time you try. And, you may think you're risking being a pest or annoying by going after them 3, 4, 5 times. But some of our best hires have been people that just wouldn't leave us alone. And it's nice to see that someone really, really wants to work for your company. And, they're not just looking for any job. They really want to work for you. Mm-hmm. So that's number one. I mean, I think that ties into a kind of enthusiasm, and we can talk about this a little later in our chat. But enthusiasm and a passion is probably the easiest thing to convey in an interview, and it's really the number one thing I look for when I walk in the door to interview someone. Mm-hmm. So a combination of enthusiasm and persistence are always things that help. But then when it comes to the actual tactical execution of getting an interview, I'd say that it's really important. Some people have resumes that are called 1.5 to 2 to 3 pages long, and it's difficult to get through that quickly for someone that doesn't have much time. And I think it's really, really important if you're shooting someone an email to say, hey, here are my key qualifications and here are my key accomplishments. Easy to digest, will only take me, call it 20, 30 seconds to read. And from there, I can pretty easily judge whether or not that person will be, potentially a good fit at the company.
Yeah, it's an interesting insight. So how long do you typically give a resume before you either hit the delete button or at least put it to the side or flag it?
Yeah, if a resume is too cluttered, I pretty much never look at it, to be honest. So I think that it's very important, at least, this is actually only something I learned over the last several years, but, number one, not to have things on there that are non-critical. And so, that's number one. I'd say number two is be very explicit about what you've accomplished and not what your responsibilities are. It's one thing to say, hey, I was responsible for this many people and for these amount of projects, but what people in my position really care about is, what have you gotten done in your last few jobs? Because we want you to come in and execute for us. And we want people that are doers, not people that just, tell other people what to do.
It's interesting. I was giving feedback to a candidate recently about that. Actually, it was a feedback through one of my clients who said that their resume read more like a job description than a resume. And when I took another look at it, it was true. And the candidate said, well, what do you mean? And I looked at it and I said, well, all of the bullet points that you have on your resume essentially are telling what you were asked to do. But it doesn't really make any reference to how well you actually did it and what you actually accomplished during your time at that particular company. You could have easily taken that off of some job description and just put it on your resume, and that would have been that. But to really distinguish yourself, you should probably show, okay, this is what they asked me to do, and then these were the results of what they asked me to do.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So, okay, talk to me about then they've broken through the clutter, they're sitting down with you, or maybe they're on the phone with you. Give me some common mistakes that you see people make that, frankly, they should try to avoid.
Yeah. I briefly touched on this before, but number one is you can't start off an interview flat. You don't want to seem too excited, but I think there's a fine balance between, sounding genuinely enthusiastic, because the last thing when I'm taking 30 to 40 minutes out of my day to interview someone, I want someone that's psyched up and ready to talk about how much they want to work for us. So I'd say that's number one.
Yep.
Number two is you can almost never do too much research on the company or the person you're interviewing with. And the more research you do, the better off your responses are going to be. And I'm amazed sometimes when I interview people and they don't necessarily understand our value proposition at Hourly Nerd, or they don't really understand the job that I'm interviewing them for. They don't understand the history of the company. They don't understand what I do at the company. And there are ways to find that stuff out. And so I think the people that are resourceful and, do some digging and researching around the company and the person they're speaking to can really go a long way, because it helps make things more personal. And it also shows a level of hustle, to be honest, which at the end of the day can really differentiate someone.
Yeah.
So I'd say those are two very early telltale signs. And then, from there, you obviously need to be qualified and be able to speak about, the things you've accomplished.
What sort of a pass would you give people that may come off as more nervous than enthusiastic, right? In other words, they're anxious, They want the job, but they're just nervous. And so to express that enthusiasm might be a little bit tougher.
Yeah, it's tough. What I try to do, I think the best way to overcome that is, and it's almost my responsibility as an interviewer, to set the stage in a more relaxed tone, because at the end of the day, an uptight kind of rigid work environment isn't the way we conduct business at Hourly Nerd. And so if it's me coming in and maybe talking about my brief background, maybe looping in a funny story or talking about something that happened during the day, I try to myself, if someone seems nervous, kind of lighten things up a little bit. But in terms of advice for interviewees, I think an easy way to kind of, kick things off is to just have your resume and your story. Because the first question I always ask to an interviewee is, hey, walk me through your story, walk me through your resume. And usually once you get the first question as an interviewee down, things tend to get easier. So know your resume down pat, know exactly what you want to highlight. Maybe if you want to weave in a couple of personal anecdotes, but that kind of allows things to progress smoothly, and from there it gets easier.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way to sort of get the candidate to relax a little bit as well, right? In other words, if they don't know what's on their resume, if they can't answer that question, it's probably going to be a really uncomfortable interview, right? But obviously, if they're able to do that and they're like, yes, I nailed that one, now all of a sudden they get a little bit more confidence, maybe they're more relaxed, and now maybe the enthusiasm can come out. So that's a good tip. Can a candidate have the right experience you've gone through the resume, they have the right experience, but essentially they're just not right for hourly nerd or for a particular company?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, successful companies make missteps on, on the cultural front all the time. And there are incredibly smart, incredibly experienced people out there that wouldn't necessarily be a good fit at a company like ours or at another smaller, more, entrepreneurial type place. I think what we really look for is not only people that have been accomplished and experienced and are going to be able to come in and make a contribution, but people that are willing and able to learn, but also understand their weaknesses. And so what, a telltale question I ask people is, what are your key areas for development? What are your blind spots? And the people that don't answer that question well typically are the people that aren't very self-aware and think they kind of can come in and do everything. And that's not the type of person we want. And then, the other ones are just a general enthusiasm and passion for what we're doing. Like I mentioned in a prior question, just, being passionate about what we do and being able to present an idea for how you'd be able to contribute to our goals is a very telltale sign as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people make the mistake of you talk about being self-aware and certain things that they need to work on or shortcomings that they might have. They mistakenly give an ambiguous answer sometimes that makes it sound like they're patting themselves on the back in a weird sort of roundabout way, which always, to me, is disingenuous and uncomfortable.
Right. Agreed.
So a lot of times, you mentioned cultural fit. Oftentimes I hear executive level presence thrown out there as well. Define for me executive level presence or cultural fit. What does it mean? I know it's hard to define, but do me a favor and try to articulate it for me.
Yeah. I think everyone's challenged to kind of codify what their culture is and what it means. I think there are a number of inputs to what makes our culture very, very unique and in a way is, something, it's one of the first, few things we look in an interviewee. So I'd say number one, the proven track record of working very hard, right? And I think that they're very easy ways for an interviewee to communicate, look at what I've accomplished, but also, look how hard I've worked and then look how hard I'm willing to work. I'd say number two, and this may be difficult for the more nervous ones, but the ability to be a bit lighthearted, right? And so that's where I, as an interviewer, try to inject some humor or a little more relaxed atmosphere. Because at the end of the day, we work very hard at Hourly Nerd, and one of the reasons we're able to do that in a sustained way is because we enjoy being around each other and we enjoy, 30 minutes to 40 minutes a day joking around and at the end of work, a couple times a week, maybe having beers. And so, I think it's the ability to separate work and personal stuff, but also allow them to blend together in a way that's fun. And then also, like I touched on before, humility. Even though I'm a co-founder of the company and one of the leaders of the firm, I have blind spots. I have areas of weakness, and we're hiring people to fill those weak spots for us, and we're going to be going to those people for advice. But then we also need them to understand when they have questions and when they need advice to come to us or go to someone else in the firm. So I'd say those are probably the top three qualities we look for.
How soon during the interview do you realize that someone won't be a cultural fit?
Yeah. It's hard. Culture is such a subjective term in a lot of ways, and you almost have to kind of live it to understand it. But again, early on in an interview, if someone's not psyched up, it's a very telltale sign. I'd say that there's no real timetable for understanding, whether or not someone's a good cultural fit. But that's why you need to have person-to-person live interviews and not have them on the phone, because it's very hard to. I think it's almost unfair to have an interviewee try to communicate who they are and what they've done over the phone, and it's really unfair for me to try to evaluate who they are over the phone, because a lot of what people are able to communicate is via hand motions and smiling and how they project their voice. And so, I'd be lying if I said that I knew, that there's always a telltale sign. It's kind of something that you have to gauge as the conversation goes on.
And you mentioned shortcomings. How do you handle it or how should a candidate, I suppose, handle it when they've been let go at their last company for underperformance. And it's always an uncomfortable situation. And you hear sometimes it's sort of cloaked in, there was a layoff and I was the last one in and the first one to be gone. But, if someone were to encounter that situation and you're interviewing them and they have been let go for poor performance, how should they handle it?
Yeah, I mean, you never want to frame it as an interviewee as, hey, I was let go because I underperformed.
Right.
I think in a lot of instances, what happens is it's not necessarily a good fit, right? And that's understandable. That stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like, companies let go strong candidates all the time because, frankly, it could have been the company's fault by hiring them into a role that they just weren't good fits for. So I think, honesty is a great thing, but at the end of the day, you also are selling and pitching yourself and framing it in a way that, hey, it wasn't necessarily a good fit, while also being a bit self-effacing and saying, hey, maybe I did a bad job of gauging myself for the role. But I think the role to hire fit can be a nice way of framing it for people.
Have you had that experience directly where someone wasn't a fit at another company, and it was obvious, and you decided that this person has the right ability, skill set, and all that stuff to hire them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what we find very valuable during the interview process is getting references, right? And it's key for an interviewee to have strong references lined up, because it's one thing to hear, someone pitch themselves. It's totally another thing to have someone that's relatively non-biased go to bat for them as well. And so, there are very legitimate reasons for why a certain person is not good at a corporate job or for a startup job or for, a finance role versus a marketing role. And the way to really, sell you want to sell yourself in the interview, but also make sure that the people you've lined up for references, could be expecting a call, and B, are consistent with what your story is, right? You never just want to line up a reference that hasn't, spoken to you in a while and doesn't understand, the future employee or employer's concerns. And so, not only having a consistent message that you're delivering, but also that your references are delivering as well.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. And you've mentioned a number of things through the interview process that you look for in candidates, but one of the promises that I make at the top of the interview is to make sure that you will share with us the 3 core competencies that you must see in order to move someone along, either to make them an offer or to the next round of interviews. So we talked about enthusiasm, we talked about being prepared, talked about cultural fit, talked about being self-aware. Are those the top 3, or give me your top 3 core competencies that you must see to move someone forward and make an offer? Yeah,
I'd say, you mentioned a couple of good ones. Enthusiasm and kind of research ahead of the interview should be givens. And so, you're not even going to really get past the first 10 minutes if you have those. But then after you've kind of crossed that bridge, number one is people that have done things, right? We talked about this, and it's not only putting it on paper, but it's being able to articulate it in a way that it's clear that it was you that did these things and you played a key role in accomplishing these things. That's number one. Number 2 is I really like to understand what decisions went into people's, what drove the decisions that have led people to certain career paths, right? Because we like people that have made deliberate decisions about their next move every time they've done it, and it's not just kind of they're going by the blow of the wind. And so, the ability to say, hey, I was at this job, I liked it for these reasons, didn't like it for these reasons, and I moved to this job for X, Y, and Z, and then I left there for these reasons because I didn't like it, but I liked it here, and then moved here for these reasons. And so, we like people that it doesn't have to be a completely straight, consistent path, but there need to be reasons for when you make left and right turns, because deliberate, more strategic thinkers are kind of the people we're always looking for at all levels of the organization. So I'd say those 2 things are really just take some upfront thought before coming into an interview. It's not necessarily, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to be able to kind of communicate those 2 things.
Right. And how should someone effectively then close out the interview with you? What are you looking for as your parting ways and moving on?
Yeah, I mean, one common mistake that I didn't mention earlier that I see people make, which just shouldn't happen, is everyone should come prepared with at least 3 interesting questions for the interviewee, for the interviewer. I'm sorry. And a great way to close out an interview is to ask earnest, honest, thoughtful questions. Because at the end of the day, everyone likes kind of talking about their own companies, likes talking about their own roles, likes talking about the strategic initiatives they're working on. And so it doesn't have to be, at the end of an interview, you're like, I want this job for these 10 reasons, and this is why I'm that qualified. There's a more subtle way of, asking really, really good questions, because that shows you've done some, upfront thinking and aren't necessarily just talking about yourself. You're interested about the company, about the person interviewing you, and about where the company's going.
Yeah, I recruit salespeople exclusively, and one of the things that I always mention to them is that when they ask, so do you have any questions for us, or what questions do you have for us? To me, that's always where the interview actually starts, at least for a salesperson, because any real good, strong salesperson does a fantastic job of, first of all, they're almost inherently curious, right? They good salespeople want to know more. And the more that you know as a salesperson, you're able to uncover more needs as you're talking to a person. So as you're qualifying a job, it's really the same thing. You want to be able to show them that you know how to qualify an opportunity, and the best way to do that is to obviously ask really good questions. They should have some foundation, of course, to them, not just random questions that you're asking, but a good linear thought process into it. So that's good to hear. So this has been fantastic. Just a couple of other questions that I have for you to get you, and we'll get you out of here, which is very simple. Are you hiring? For which positions are you hiring? And then how would you like folks to apply and or get in touch with you?
Yeah, no, I'm actually glad you asked that question. So, we're at a really interesting point at Hourly Nerd right now, because we have a very strong core team, but we are very much looking for strong people to add onto the team in two key areas. Number one is technical people. So whether it's back end programmers or front end designers, people that will be building a world class product that's going to sustain itself and scale over time. So that's number one. And number two, we're looking for market facing sales and marketing people. And these roles vary too. It could be someone that's a bit more technical in nature, that is well versed in inbound marketing or SEO and SEM and kind of the newfound ways of driving business to websites, but also people that are going to be talking to customers, selling our product. And it's obviously a very important hiring decision when it comes to hiring people who are going to be representing your brand. And so it's really those two buckets, kind of the technical people, and then also front end sales and marketing that we're actively hiring in those two areas right now.
Okay, great. And how would you like folks to apply?
You know what? The easiest way right now is probably just to send me an email with a resume, and hopefully if people saw this interview, I instruct them a little bit as to how to effectively do that. My email is peter@hourlynerd.com. We don't have an HR department at this point, so the co-founders are really the ones that are sourcing and vetting talent. And so feel free to shoot me a resume.
And even if you don't shoot them a resume, at least shoot them an email to say thank you for these just the advice that Peter has been able to give today, and just all of the interview tips and tricks, so to speak. So I really appreciate it. Peter Maglathlin, co-founder of Hourly Nerd, I thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Thanks, Jay.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching my interview with Peter Maglathlin. Now, don't forget to sign up here to get other future interviews with other business leaders about how you can improve your interview ability with tips and advice from these very folks. Thank you.